Hi everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe. In this video, we're going to talk about the Golden Gate, otherwise known as the Shushan Gate, and it's this sealed gate on the east end of the Temple Mount that faces the Mount of Olives. Jews believe that when the Messiah comes, he's going to go through this gate into the temple. And Christians believe that when Christ comes at the second coming, he'll come to the Mount of Olives and likewise walk through the east gate to the temple. And the interesting thing is that it's sealed. Now, there's some debate and controversy about this, but from a Jewish point of view, there was a Muslim sultan that sealed the gate, and they believe that he did that to prevent Messiah from coming. Or on the other side, they might say, well, we don't want like a false Messiah to come and cause problems. So yeah, I'm not interested in the debate, but I just want to point out that there's this idea of Messiah, or with Christians, Christ coming at the second coming and coming through this gate. Okay. And this isn't the first time that we've talked about it on the channel. I've always wondered, can I find anywhere in church literature, or can I find a talk or discourse that would say that that's what we believe, that Christ is going to go through the Eastern Gate? It turns out, yes. I just came across that like a day or two ago, and I want to share that with you. I still hold to my opinion that the BYU Jerusalem Center could be the temple, or one of many temples in Jerusalem. I think that the BYU Jerusalem Center is really important. It's on the same ridge as the Mount of Olives. You have the Mount of Olives over here, and then BYU Jerusalem Center is over here on Mount Scopus, right? We know that there have been temples like the Kirtland Temple, and then had the city of Zion been built, there was going to be a 24 temple complex of multi-purpose temples. And I think that the BYU Jerusalem Center could become like a headquarters temple, like where Christ's throne would be. So we'll have to wait and see if that happens. But I want to go over what I found from Orson Pratt, Elder Orson Pratt of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. So he talks about this. Before we proceed to that point, I want to remind everybody, or show you for the first time, some of the first videos that I made had to do, for my YouTube channel, had to do with the Golden Gate. There was one time that we had the missionaries over for dinner. One of them said, did you know that the new church symbol fits into the Golden Gate? And I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. And before I did YouTube, I was a freelance graphic designer, and I still am. But now I mostly focus on YouTube. And I decided to go to Photoshop and see if I could, just fit it in there. And sure enough, it fits. Now, you see this green line right here? That represents, let me take this off. That represents ground level. You can see like this smaller doorway right here. So this would be ground level, and like steps would go up to that. So if you take off the bottom part of the church symbol, the top part fits into these archways, which is pretty neat. And what's also really neat is that there's like a parallel between the Temple Mount and the Salt Lake Temple. I've done other videos where I don't know that this is official like church doctrine, but we did come across this paper that was written that's on BYU's website, where it was talking about the fact that the front doors of the Salt Lake Temple are locked, right? That's not how you get in. The general public, they go through like this side entrance that goes down into the ground, and then you come up through the temple. So this paper was talking about the fact that the doors are locked because those doors are reserved for Christ at his second coming. Again, I don't know if that's like official or not. It may or may not be. I haven't been able to find much more to substantiate that. But if that's the case, then you have a similar situation. And you'll see that the doors of the Salt Lake Temple are the same shape as the church symbol. In fact, here's a close-up. You have this architectural rendering of the front part of the temple. Let me take that off for a second. So there's the doorway, and then you put the church symbol in there, and it fits perfectly. So it's just an interesting observation, because the church symbol is the resurrected Christ. That's what we're going to see when Christ comes, is the resurrected Christ at his second coming. And you have these two locations. what is currently church headquarters in Salt Lake, with the Salt Lake Temple being the primary or kind of like headquarters temple, and then the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. It's just a really interesting thing. And I will point out that these are the like proportions of the symbol. You take a circle and then you take its diameter, and then if you make a square whose sides are the same length as the diameter of that circle, and then you bisect the circle with that square, this is the shape that you get. This kind of like, tombstone type shape. And then if you take the square and you cut it in half and then you move it down, that's the size of this like bottom part of the church symbol that has the name of the church in it. So that's probably why, like, I'm not saying that they were purposely doing this when they constructed the Salt Lake Temple, but they were probably thinking along those lines with like circle and square and half a square. It's probably like an architectural thing. When it comes to the Golden Gate back in Jerusalem, I did show in previous videos that in antiquity, not all arches were exactly like this. Some were thinner, some had different proportions. So it just so happens that the Golden Gate is like this and the church symbol is like that. So it's just an interesting thing to observe. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's look at what Elder Orson Pratt said. This is in Journal of Discourses, March 10th, 1872, in the Tabernacle in Salt Lake. Okay, so first he talks about Old Jerusalem and New Jerusalem. I'm going to add more of this quote on my spreadsheets, but for this video, I just want to focus on this part. So after talking about that, the difference between Old Jerusalem and New Jerusalem, he says, "Now every person will acknowledge with me that such an order of things has not yet been fulfilled. It is the millennium. It is the glorious period of rest when Jesus personally will reign on this earth, when his throne will be built in the temple at Jerusalem, when he will descend on the Mount of Olives on the east of Jerusalem, accompanied by all his saints," which we just talked about that in a recent video. It does seem that all the saints are going to be there, both resurrected, and then those of us that are righteous that attend the wedding feast will be quickened and caught up, and it seems that we'll come with him to Jerusalem. I did a really interesting video about this like council at Jerusalem. You may want to go back a couple of videos and find that, because it's like a unique thing that I've never seen anywhere else, where it talks about this like grand council in Old Jerusalem, where the house of Israel will be united, for the first time since the northern kingdom was taken away captive. So like politically and ecclesiastically united in this way. Okay, continuing. As you will read in the last chapter of the prophet Zechariah, "The Lord thy God shall come," says Zechariah, "and all his saints with him. And he shall stand his feet in that day on the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem to the east. And the Mount of Olives shall divide asunder, half of the mountain moving towards the north and half towards the south. And there shall be a very great valley," and so on. "And when he descends with all his saints on that mountain, and this great convulsion of the earth takes place, then will Jesus proceed down to the new gate." So now we're talking about the Golden Gate. "Then will Jesus proceed down to the new gate that will be built on the east side of the temple, the east gate of the temple, and he will enter into that temple and will sit himself on the throne that will be built in that temple." Okay, so according to what Elder Pratt is saying here, you are going to have a temple that's on the Temple Mount. You're going to have the east gate that Christ will go through, and then he'll go and sit on his throne. As far as I know, this is the only place in church literature or in discourses or general conference talks that anyone has like actually said this. So usually when I only hear like one person say something, I don't just like disregard it, but I take it a little bit with a grain of salt, because it could just be his opinion, or he may just have it on really good authority. He knows that that's exactly what's going to happen. So I like to look at other statements by other general authorities and kind of go with whatever the prevailing view is. I also take into account that more light, more is revealed over time, line upon line, precept upon precept. So I tend to go with whatever the more recent statements are, because there could have been revelation received in that time. So anyway, but I'm taking this into account. Ezekiel, when describing this in the 43rd chapter of his prophecy, says, or rather the Lord through Ezekiel says, "Son of man, hold the place of my throne and the place of the soles of my feet, where I will dwell in the midst of the children of Israel forever, and they shall no more defile my name," and so forth. Here is a prediction that in that temple will be a certain apartment dedicated and set apart for the throne of the Lord, where he will sit, as the prophet Zechariah and many of the apostles have predicted, on the throne of his father David, and judge the whole house of Israel. So I guess that's to be expected. Just kind of interesting him talking about like a certain room in the temple where the throne would be. Okay, continuing. Dwell with them personally, be in their midst. Where will be the 12 apostles that wandered about with him when Jesus comes and sits upon that throne? They will also be sitting upon thrones. Where? In Palestine. Ye who have followed me in this regeneration shall sit upon 12 thrones and shall judge the 12 tribes of Israel. And ye shall eat and drink at my table at that time. You shall do this. I'm going to be honest. So if you make it into the millennium, by definition, you are at least living a terrestrial law, either terrestrial or celestial. So generally speaking, you are a good person moving into the millennium. The wicked are removed. Those that live decent lives, they move into the millennium. So judgment from the 12, it kind of scares me. We've talked about judgment from Adam at Adam on Diamond. That also kind of scares me. Does it scare any of you? I don't know. Of course, there's going to be a final judgment and everything, but I don't know. Let's just all be on our best behavior. Okay. Let's all do our best. Treat each other with kindness and love. Okay. So what? Immortal beings sitting upon thrones, having a table set before them and eating and drinking at the table of Jesus in Jerusalem. Yes, this is what is promised and what we are looking for. This is the order of things that will come when Zion is fully established on the earth, preparatory to that order of things. No wonder that nations will no longer lift up sword against nation. No wonder that kings will no longer fight against kings and emperors against emperors. No wonder that they will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, for it will be a day of peace and rest, of which our present Sabbath is typical. As there is one day out of 7 set apart, sanctified, and ordained as a day of rest, so there is 1,000 years set apart as a day of rest out of the 7,000 which constitute the temporal existence of our earth. That will be the time when the Lord Jesus will reign as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. That will be the time when the kings and nations will come up to Zion, also to Jerusalem. The kingdoms will be gathered together to serve the Lord. And I think that's all I have. So here's the one place that I know where a prophet or apostle actually says that Christ will go through the east gate of the temple. So, as I always do, I save these type of things on my spreadsheets to keep everything in order and so I don't forget it. And while we're here, let's just do a quick review of some of the key points, because when it comes to prophecy, I think that you can read the scriptures and have a certain idea of how things are supposed to happen, and that may be the case, but it may not be the case. Prophecy may take place in a different way than what you picture. And I think sometimes we don't really know exactly everything that's going to happen and how it's going to happen, or it may happen in a way that you don't think. So I think that the temple in Jerusalem is one of those things. Maybe it's better if we do this going from the most recent quote and then going back in time. So the most recent quote that I have in regards to the future temple in Jerusalem is by Elder Bruce R. McConkie. I'll just read the parts that I have highlighted. So talking about this temple, he says that this temple perhaps will be on the very site of the old one. So according to him, it's not certain that it will be on the Temple Mount. Let me just say one thing really quick. I did a video a while ago about the Dome of the Rock, and I talked about how we have temples today that are temples, but the buildings were not originally built to be temples. You have tabernacles that have been turned into temples, like the Vernal Tabernacle and the Provo, what is now the Provo City Center Temple. Those were not originally built to be temples, and yet they now are. We also have that chapel in Copenhagen that's now a temple. There's an office building in Brussels that was recently announced. It's just a regular office building, but it's going to be renovated into a temple. So I could see one way of this happening is the Dome of the Rock being turned into a temple. I'm sure that Jews were involved in building it. I did my video about it. The actual design of the Dome of the Rock is not Muslim. It's based on Christian churches that are there in Jerusalem. So that's an interesting detail about it. So, and it can always be renovated. It can be added onto. Whatever needs to happen, maybe that's how it'll happen. And that would be a very peaceful way that things would happen. You would have all these Muslims, the ones that are good, that are at least living a terrestrial lifestyle, they're going to come with us too into the millennium. And that would be a very peaceful solution. It's like, this will be my new temple. It does need to be changed. We got to rearrange some things, but this is going to be it. And in this way, we're all going to be united. You are also sons and daughters of God. And more than that, not more than that, in addition to that, you're children of Abraham. So let's keep this building and let's have it be a symbol of unity of all of Abraham's children. That would be a very beautiful thing. I don't think that that's not possible. I think that could be the case, but we'll see. So Elder Bruce R. McConkie says perhaps on the very side of the old one, but maybe not. And then later on he says, oh, by the way, this is in Millennial Messiah, pages 278 to 280. Who shall build this temple? The Lord himself shall do it by the hands of his servants, the prophets. And later on he says, there's only one people who know how to build temples and what to do in them when they are completed. That people is the Latter-day Saints. The temple in Jerusalem will not be built by Jews who have assembled there for political purposes as at present. And then later, the temple in Jerusalem will be built by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So that's the most recent statement that I know of that talks about these details in regard to the Jerusalem temple. So I feel like that has weight behind it because line upon line, precept upon precept, maybe more revelation came in. And Elder Bruce R. McConkie and others had talked about it, and he just he put that in his book. Who knows? If we go to Elder James E. Talmage of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, this is in The House of the Lord, a study of holy sanctuaries, ancient and modern, pages 43 to 45. He's talking about the temple that Ezekiel foresaw. Ezekiel received very specific details of what this temple is supposed to be. So Elder Talmage says, as to whether the prophet himself considered the design so shown as one to be subsequently realized, or as but a grand yet unattainable ideal, is not declared. Certain it is that the temple of the vision has not yet been builded. So there's Ezekiel's temple, and he's like, did he really think that that's exactly what it was going to be? It's not clear. So I feel like there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to this temple, and that's okay. We don't have to be privy to every single thing and know exactly how things are going to play out. Let's just wait and see, and let's consider different possibilities. This is from Charles W. Penrose. He later became, after saying this, he became a member of the First Presidency. He says, talking about the temple, that the temple may be rebuilt and the mosque of the Muslim which now stands in its place may be removed out of the way. So from his understanding, the Dome of the Rock was going to go, and then I guess like the third temple, the way that we think of it, like the way that the Jews think of it, would be built in its place. Here's another quote from Elder Orson Pratt, Journal of Discourses, Volume 20, pages 153 to 154. Credit goes to Amanda Farnsworth. Amanda, if you're listening, let me know in the comments, and thank you for pointing this out. So at this part of the quote, he says, "A temple is to be reared in ancient Palestine where it formerly stood." So he thought it was supposed to be built in the same place, and I would not be surprised if that's the case. Again, I wouldn't be surprised if there's going to be multiple temples in Jerusalem. You understand? When you think about New Jerusalem, there's going to be 24. The ones on the Eastern Bloc are for the Aaronic priesthood. The ones on the Western Bloc are for the Melchizedek priesthood. And they're in groups of 3, and each group is for like a different office of the priesthood. We don't have all the details, at least not that I know of how this would have worked, but it seems like they were going to be multi-purpose buildings. So if one of the world headquarters in New Jerusalem, Jackson County, Missouri, is going to have a complex of temples, multi-purpose temples, why wouldn't the other world headquarters have that too in Jerusalem? So what if it's the BYU Jerusalem Center? It's turned into like a headquarters temple, and later on, the temple on the Temple Mount is built. There's a lot of possibilities. This one is President John Taylor, at the time president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. He's telling a story about talking to Baron Rothschild, a Jew. And this is in Journal of Discourses, Volume 18, pages 199 to 200. And he's talking about the Salt Lake Temple and giving him a tour, I guess, of Temple Square. And they start talking about the temple in Jerusalem. And let me just read these highlights. So John Taylor to Rothschild. Okay, not the church. He's talking about the Jews. You will build a temple, for the Lord has shown us, among other things, that you Jews have quite a role to perform in the latter days, in that all the things spoken by your old prophets will be fulfilled, that you will be gathered to old Jerusalem, and that you will build a temple there. And when you build that temple, and the time has arrived, the Lord whom ye seek will suddenly come to his temple. Later on, Baron Rothschild says, well, is this not the temple? Referring to the Salt Lake Temple. And then John Taylor says, no, not that you are going to build. Okay. And then here's another one from Charles W. Penrose. Again, he became a member of the First Presidency. He again, this is earlier on in the Millennial Star, says that the temple would be built in its former place. So that would be on the Temple Mount. And then the last one I want to share is from Elder Parley P. Pratt of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles in A Voice of Warning, page 33. And he says that the city and the temple are going to be rebuilt by the Jews. So if you were to take all these together, the consensus seems to be that the Jews would build it and that it would be in the former place. Elder Bruce R. McConkie says that it could be on the very site, or it may not, and he's saying that it would be the church that builds it. I think that all of that could be true. Just one more time, I think that initially the BYU Jerusalem Center could become a temple. I think there's a reason why President Holland said that there were 33 miracles that went into the BYU Jerusalem Center becoming a reality. Let me look that up. 33 miracles, BYU Jerusalem Center. This is probably it right here. So he was president of BYU when this was constructed. So he was very instrumental in this becoming a reality. Here it is. He says, I better zoom in case you want to read along. He says, that was one of 33 miracles, large or small, that happened to make the BYU Jerusalem Center possible. And then later on, I think it's in this same, in the same article, he says, so first, the article says, the full potential of the BYU Jerusalem Center is still unrealized. So what does that mean? It's functioning the way that it was built. It was built to be a campus for BYU students who are in the Near East Studies program. So what else is there to be realized? Well, this is what President Holland said. I don't know what it will mean a generation after we're gone, or what future purposes the Lord will have for it. But I hope students from all over the world can be blessed by it. My testimony to you is that the Lord wanted that center built and has it there for great purposes that we now see only dimly. So the Lord can do whatever he wants. He can turn that into a temple, and it doesn't have to be a temple with a baptismal font. It can be just like an administrative building for Christ's throne or whatever it needs to be. But I think that everything that went into it, the Lord, just like he said, the Lord really did want that there. And it's interesting that it's on the same mountain ridge as the Mount of Olives. Mount of Olives, you follow the ridge, you get to Mount Scopus, and there it is, with a clear view of the Temple Mount. So we'll just see what happens, but I just wanted to, bringing it back full circle. Elder Orson Pratt said Christ would come through the Golden Gate, and I like that idea because I like the idea of how the church symbol fits in this Golden Gate. Of course, we don't know if they actually do, if somehow they do build the third temple, if somehow the Dome of the Rock is removed, which is a pretty crazy thing to think. But if that happens, then who knows? Maybe they would just take out the sealed portion and try and keep everything original. I assume that's probably what they would do. But we'll see what happens. Okay, that's going to be it for this one. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also, make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.